Okay, so you want to own the Empire State Building. Not an apartment inside it, not a souvenir model from the gift shop, the actual building. You picture yourself standing in the Art Deco lobby while thousands of office workers enter. Millions of tourists buy tickets to the top, and radio stations pay for space on the antenna. Every elevator ride feels like revenue. Every photograph taken from Fifth Avenue feels like free advertising. King Kong has already handled the brand awareness, so how difficult could the rest possibly be? The answer is extremely difficult. You would not be buying one skyscraper. You would be buying an office tower, a tourist attraction, a broadcasting platform, a retail property, a global trademark, and a historic monument with 6,514 windows that all eventually need attention. The building rises 1,454 feet, including its antenna, contains roughly 2.7 million square feet of office space, operates 73 elevators, and welcomes more than 2.5 million visitors in a typical year. That is less like owning a building and more like owning a very narrow country where the national transportation system moves straight up. The Empire State Building is currently the flagship asset of Empire State Realty Trust, a publicly traded real estate investment trust. It is not sitting in the personal name of one billionaire who keeps the keys in a kitchen drawer. It is held through corporate entities, supported by shareholders, lenders, insurers, engineers, professional managers, leasing teams, security departments, and enough lawyers to occupy several floors themselves. This structure matters because the building is too expensive and too complicated for almost any individual buyer to own alone. What would it cost today? There is no active listing, but we can build a rough valuation from the income streams. At the end of 2025, the building contained about 2.71 million rentable office square feet, was approximately 91.8% occupied and 96% leased, and carried annualized office rent of about $172.5 million. The observatory generated another $128.3 million of revenue and approximately $90.1 million of net operating income. Broadcasting licenses and related leases contributed about $15.4 million more. That gives you more than $316 million in visible annualized office rent and annual revenue from the observatory and broadcasting before fully accounting for retail, reimbursements, partnerships, and licensing. Now build a simplified investor model. Suppose the office, retail, and broadcasting operations together produce around $110 million to $140 million of annual net operating income, and you add roughly $90 million from the observatory. That gives an illustrative total NOI of perhaps $200 million to $230 million. Apply a hypothetical capitalization rate between 5% and 6%, and the value lands around $3.3 billion to $4.6 billion. This is not an appraisal. It is the financial equivalent of measuring a dinosaur from its footprint. The real price would depend on interest rates, lease expirations, taxes, capital spending, and how badly two billionaires wanted to stop the other one from winning the auction. You are not arriving with a mortgage pre-approval and 20% down. You are arriving with a consortium, several investment banks, and a presentation containing the phrase transformational landmark opportunity 14 times. The first revenue engine is office rent. Companies lease floors and pay based on square footage, lease length, location, build-out quality, and negotiating power. At the end of 2025, annualized office rent averaged about $69.96 per occupied square foot. Major tenants included LinkedIn, Centric Brands, and Coty. Long leases stabilize cash flow, but the rent is not pure profit. Large tenants often demand free rent periods, construction allowances, broker commissions, upgraded electrical systems, and custom offices. A landlord may sign a 10-year lease worth tens of millions and still write a large check before the tenant pays the first month. The tenant receives a beautiful office. You receive a spreadsheet explaining why the deal becomes profitable in year 4. The second revenue engine is what makes this building different from an ordinary tower: the observatory. Current ticket products begin around $64 for flexible access to the 86th floor and around $79 for the 86th and 102nd floors before booking charges and upgrades. More than 2.5 million people visit each year. In 2025, the observatory produced about $128.3 million in revenue and $90.1 million in NOI, an operating margin of roughly 70%. That is extraordinary for a physical attraction. The customer pays for an elevator ride, a museum experience, and a view that does not need to be manufactured, shipped, refrigerated, or returned because it arrived in the wrong size. The inventory is the skyline, and New York restocks it every morning. But the observatory is not free money. It requires security screening, ticketing systems, visitor staff, cleaning, elevator capacity, heating on the outdoor deck, marketing, insurance, and crowd control. It is also exposed to tourism cycles. A tenant may owe rent through a weak quarter. A tourist who cancels a New York trip owes you nothing. Weather matters, exchange rates matter, international travel matters. A recession in another country can quietly reduce the number of people standing in your gift shop 6 months later. The pandemic showed the danger perfectly. In 2019, the observatory generated about $128.8 million of revenue. In 2020, that collapsed to roughly $29.1 million. And in 2021, it recovered only to about $41.5 million. The building did not become shorter. The view did not become less impressive. The cost of maintaining elevators, insurance, security systems, and the property did not politely disappear. The customers did. A landmark can remain world famous while the cash register becomes very quiet. The third revenue engine sits above nearly everyone's head: broadcasting. Television and radio companies license space connected to the mast because height is commercially useful. In 2025, broadcasting licenses and related leases produced about $15.4 million in revenue. It is smaller than office rent or tourism, but valuable because it monetizes a section of the building that cannot become another ordinary office floor. Even the part most people associate with a giant fictional ape has a leasing department. Then there is retail, dining, merchandise, partnerships, and licensing. Restaurants and stores pay for access to enormous foot traffic. The building licenses its name and image for promotional use. Most landlords advertise their properties. The Empire State Building can charge other companies to borrow its fame. The trick is monetizing the icon without turning it into a 1,454-foot billboard for discounted phone plans. Now we reach the expenses, which are where your ownership fantasy develops a nervous twitch. Start with property taxes. New York City does not look at a multi-billion-dollar midtown skyscraper and say, "You seem iconic. This one is on us." Then add insurance for terrorism, business interruption, major damage, and liability. Empire State Realty Trust reports aggregate terrorism coverage of up to $2 billion for the building through commercial insurance, a captive program, and the federal terrorism backstop. That sentence alone tells you your insurance broker will not be someone operating from a small office beside a dry cleaner. Utilities are another major cost. You are heating, cooling, lighting, and powering millions of square feet while running elevators that function like a vertical transit network. The owners invested in a major sustainability retrofit as part of a $550 million rebuilding program. All 6,514 windows were upgraded on site. Elevators received regenerative technology, lighting systems were modernized, and the project targeted a guaranteed 38% reduction in energy use with an estimated 3-year payback. Sustainability here was not just public relations. Saving a small percentage on a gigantic utility bill is still a gigantic amount of money. Maintenance never ends. There are elevators, pumps, cooling systems, electrical networks, fire systems, facades, stonework, roofs, security equipment, broadcast equipment, observation decks, and thousands of windows exposed to New York weather. Historic status makes some work slower and more expensive because you cannot replace every old detail with whatever is cheapest at the hardware store. A leak near the top of the Empire State Building becomes a project involving engineers, specialized contractors, permits, street coordination, and an invoice containing the phrase, "high altitude access." Labor is equally relentless. The building needs engineers, cleaners, security officers, visitor employees, leasing professionals, managers, maintenance crews, marketers, and specialized technicians. It operates as an office building during the day and a tourist attraction into the night, 365 days a year. Office tenants and tourists share the same vertical infrastructure, and both believe they are the priority. Financing adds another layer of risk. Suppose your consortium buys the building for $4 billion with 55% debt. That means borrowing $2.2 billion. At a hypothetical 5.5% interest rate, annual interest alone would be about $121 million before principal repayment. If the building produces $215 million in NOI, interest consumes more than half of it. After capital spending, leasing costs, and reserves, the cash left for investors becomes much smaller than the headline revenue suggests. The building looks like a monument. The investment behaves like a leveraged spreadsheet with excellent views. There is also concentration risk. In 2025, the Empire State Building represented about 32.3% of Empire State Realty Trust's total rental revenue, and the observatory was important enough for the company to warn investors that losing its revenue could materially damage results. A normal office building can quietly have a bad month. The Empire State Building has a bad month in public, with tenants, tourists, journalists, shareholders, and several million people staring at its lights. So, is owning it a good business? Potentially, yes, but not because it is simply a famous office tower. Its strength comes from diversification inside one address. Office leases create recurring income. The observatory turns fame into high-margin ticket revenue. Broadcasting monetizes height. Retail monetizes foot traffic. Licensing monetizes the image. Energy upgrades reduce operating costs. The building's brand gives it an advantage another landlord cannot reproduce by installing nicer marble in a lobby. You can build a taller tower. You cannot build another Empire State Building, because the original has been collecting history, films, photographs, tourist memories, and New York mythology since 1931. The weakness is that you pay for every advantage up front. At a hypothetical value of several $billion, your return depends on maintaining occupancy, keeping the observatory attractive, controlling expenses, renewing tenants, financing the purchase carefully, and modernizing a nearly century-old structure without destroying what makes it special. You are also buying every future elevator modernization, insurance renewal, tax increase, and storm that arrives sideways at the 102nd floor. So, you want to own the Empire State Building. Bring roughly $1.5 billion to $2 billion of equity, arrange several billion more in financing, hire a small army of engineers and operators, and prepare to manage an office tower, museum, tourist attraction, broadcast mast, retail center, and historic landmark at the same time. If everything works, The building can generate hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue and perhaps more than $200 million in property-level operating income under a reasonable scenario. If things go badly, you will discover that even the most famous building on Earth cannot force tenants to renew, tourists to travel, or banks to lower interest rates. The Empire State Building may touch the clouds, but its economics remain firmly attached to the ground. And unfortunately, the ground is in Midtown Manhattan, where absolutely nothing is cheap.